Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the UCD What It Takes Employability series. My name is Jenny Blake, and I'm an Associate Director on the UCD Alumni Relations team. This is the second episode of our spring series, focusing on what it takes to negotiate effectively. This masterclass kicks off the UCD Women in Leadership Conference campaign, and it's a taster of the kind of content that you'll experience at the main conference on February 24th and 25th. Today, we'll be hearing from Stephen Boyle, a negotiation trainer and lecturer at UCD Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School. Stephen has delivered negotiation skills programs worldwide, and he's also worked as a consultant with the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. On a personal note, I can say that I'm a previous student of Stephen's on his negotiation skills course in UCD Smurfit Executive Development, and I can certainly testify that I'm still using his practical skills that he gave me during that 3-day course. Yeah, in work, but actually mostly with my children. So thanks for that, Stephen. Stephen will speak for approximately half an hour, and we'll take a further 30 minutes for the Q&A session, which will be led by my colleague Michelle Cohen, Careers Consultant in the UCD Careers Network. So if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Stephen will answer as many of them as he can. If you want to continue the conversation after this session, you can meet Stephen, as I mentioned, at the UCD Women in Leadership Conference on the 25th of February, as he'll be leading a mentor circle that day. Finally, this session is being recorded, so if you want to revisit it, or if you're having any connectivity issues this evening, you can find it on our UCD Alumni YouTube channel from tomorrow. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, Stephen, for volunteering your time. And without any further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. And hello, everyone. I'm delighted that we have hundreds of participants here. That's fantastic. And I'm not entirely surprised that this is a popular topic. We've all been through a lot over the last year, and while it seems like there's quite a way to go before we're fully out of the pandemic, we can all look forward to that towards the later half of this year. This has been a time of change for people as well. So I'm quite sure that an awful lot of people now who maybe feel that they've been in stasis have also had quite a deal of time to reflect on where they're going with their careers. So the focus of my talk this evening is on what it takes to negotiate effectively, but specifically what it takes to negotiate effectively in terms of job offers and salaries and promotions. So I want to lead you through, first of all, a quick overview of what you're going to get out of this evening, to give you some clear structure for this. Above all, the key is what you do before you go and negotiate. So I'm going to spend a little time explaining what you can do to ensure that you have a reasonably effective strategy before you ever reach the negotiation table. Then I want to focus on what to do at that negotiation table if you're applying for a new role. How can you put your best foot forward in the negotiation and confidently aim to get what you want? I also want to turn to the special case of how can you negotiate within your existing role? Whether it's an opportunity for promotion, career growth, or a salary raise that you're looking for, what should you do to maximize your chances of success? And I want to spend a little extra bit of time this evening on this final topic, understanding gender differences, because there has been very extensive research that shows that there absolutely are differences in the ways that men and women negotiate, in particular in relation to salaries, job offers, and promotions. I also want to give you some clear advice, some clear guidance on what you can do to address those differences. As Jenny mentioned, I will take questions at the end, so please do put your questions in the Q&A. My colleagues here will be moderating those, and I will attempt to get around to what they feel are the most common questions, the most important ones, the most interesting ones, and I want to leave plenty of time for that. Okay, the key to success really is being well prepared. It really is about what you do before you start to negotiate. I've been lecturing in negotiation and training in negotiation and advising on negotiations for 20 years. And very often, when I encounter people in workshops, in classes, they hold a perception that the key to successful negotiation is about having the right words, almost like it's a magic formula or even a magic spell that you will cast over the other side, that it's something you'll say at the negotiation table. That's not really true. The key is having a plan before you go in. So if you're not willing to put the time in to prepare, you are far less likely to succeed at the negotiation table. Planning not only boosts your chances of success, but it very importantly will also help to boost your confidence and your power at the negotiation table. And the very first step of your planning should be figuring out what is it that you want. Now, this is something that hopefully you're thinking of already if you're looking at a change or development in your career, perhaps a new role. You may have a good understanding of what you want, yet many people assume that job offer negotiation is all about and only about the salary. It's not really. You should be thinking about all your goals, but in particular, when it comes to salary, make sure you've done your homework on what you should be getting. What should you be getting? Now, you may find a range of information out there. How can you do this kind of research? There are salary surveys, there are websites where people share information about what their pay is, and the information will sometimes conflict. My general advice for negotiators is to be ambitious. So if you're seeing low, middling, and high ends of ranges, figure out where you think you should be in those ranges and aim for that. The next step is to make sure that you've prioritized what could be negotiated beyond just salary. So there really are a range of issues that could be negotiated. For starters, there are many, many monetary aspects to jobs that can act as a proxy or substitute for salary. Are there expenses, bonuses, benefits, allowances, and so on? And then there may be non-monetary issues that are very important to you also, like holidays, flexibility. You may want to gain an understanding of working hours, different locations you could work in, and so on. Unfortunately, sometimes people fall into the trap of focusing only on the money, both in terms of their search for a job and in the negotiation. And that can be a mistake if you step back and realize, well, that's not the only or the most important thing to you. Now, the next step is to figure out what's your fallback position. I know that this evening there are some current and past participants of courses that I've taught. Anyone who's been in one of my courses will know that I talk a lot about this point, the BATNA. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. And this is what you're going to do or what you're going to have if you walk away from this negotiation. In other words, if you're not happy with the outcome of the negotiation and you turn down, say, the job offer, what's your fallback position? And I emphasize this because it's probably the single most neglected aspect of people's negotiation plans. And yet it's the most important for boosting your negotiation power. Having a good alternative gives you greater power to negotiate. So for example, if you're trying to negotiate a new job, one of your fallbacks might be your existing role. Now, you don't have to assume that that's your only fallback. If you were reviewing the market and you realize, well, there are actually other roles not only I could go for, I could get, then you may regard some of those, although there may be uncertainty about which one you'd get. Perhaps you would view one of those as your best alternative. Conversely, if you are negotiating in your existing role, say for a pay rise, to understand your fallback position, you have to figure out what other kind of job could you get elsewhere and what would the pay be. The purpose of researching, exploring your BATNA, your fallback position, is not to go and do that, not to go and walk away. It's actually to strengthen your hand at the negotiation table. You're not in a strong position if you feel you've nothing to walk away to, that if your requests are turned down, you've just got to put up and shut up. Another part of your preparation is to start thinking reflexively. In the first 3 steps, you've captured some of the key decisions you need to make before you go to the negotiation table. But you should also be starting to think about, how might the other side negotiate? What do you think they're going to want? Have you learned anything during the job interviews, for example, about their pay policy, their structures, their benefits? Sometimes students say to me, for example, that they find it hard to think of questions to ask an employer when somebody says at the end of a job interview, do you have any questions for us? Towards the later stages of a job interview process, these could be good questions to ask, to uncover information that will actually help to prepare you for the negotiation. So in other words, this part of your preparation could actually overlap with the interview process that hopefully is going to lead up to that negotiation. Another aspect of assessing the other side's plan is, what's their fallback position? Do you think that they've got dozens and dozens of candidates? And if so, do you think that they're great candidates? In fact, have you asked them about what it is that they see in you as a candidate, what it is that they like about you? That's another question you could figure out. Something I'm going to come back to towards the end of this session is the fact that negotiating job offers can be a bit challenging and unnerving, probably more than many other negotiations we do. So I really recommend that part of your preparation at the end is rehearsing. And your rehearsal can start just at home with yourself. What are you going to say? How are you going to say it? When you say that out loud, how does it come out? If you feel it's not confident, why not write down what you want to say, at least how you start, so that you can get going. And then make sure when you rehearse that in front of a mirror, it sounds good, it comes across naturally. Taking it a step further, you could rehearse with a friend or a partner, feed them some questions, maybe even give them an indication of the type of person you think you might be negotiating against. Doing that can help you to be more ready if, for example, you think you're going to experience some pushback at the negotiation table. Now let's talk about what to do at the negotiation table. And a point that can be sometimes quite tricky is that it's a bad idea to engage in negotiation of, let's say, the package, the salary, until you receive an offer. Yet unfortunately, many people fall into the trap of basically negotiating and agreeing before they've even got a job offer. If you do that, if, say, for example, early on in the interview process, you get in depth into a conversation about pay, and you agree that, let's say, whatever the pay they suggest is fine for you, you really cut off your attempts to your opportunities to negotiate a bit later, and you will likely sell yourself short, because at that point you don't feel you've got the job, right? So people do tend to say, oh, I better not ask for too much because I might not get another interview. So you're better off politely or tactfully or smartly deferring the conversation. One tactic that you can use, which has seemed to work for an awful lot of students I've recommended this to, is to turn the question around. If you're asked in the early stages, what are you expecting, or what would you be looking for? Or does the range that they're talking about sound okay? Indicate that you have done your work, your research. For example, you could say, well, in preparation for this, one of the things I did was I looked at salary surveys, typical pay levels for positions like this. So I have some idea of what to expect, but I don't know a whole lot about pay policies at your company. I know you're certainly in the top percentage of your industry, so I would be expecting and hoping that that's where your pay would be aligned. But maybe you'd like to tell me a bit more about that now, or if you think this is a more appropriate conversation, if you feel I'm the right candidate, we could defer it until then. Once you do get an offer, I would suggest that first of all, emphasize what you bring to the table. So be polite, remember to say thank you, but reinforce their decision by not just saying that you're happy to be offered the job, because presumably you're going for a job you like or you want, but say why. And when you say why, try and feed back to them maybe a couple of the things that you now know they really like about you. Okay, so try and reinforce the decision that they've already made. Because I'm sure many people attending this webinar have also been at the other end, have been on the employer side. And quite often, if you're offering someone a job, you may still feel a little bit of uncertainty. So this reminder can help to, let's say, if you like, soften people up to be prepared to think about just how far will I be willing to go in this negotiation. A little bit of silence, although it can seem like an aggressive tactic, if it's used prudently, it can be quite an effective way to get an employer to pause and open up and say, for example, that, well, we could be flexible about this. Many, many years ago, I worked for a multinational company, and I remember one day bumping into one of the HR managers during a big recruitment drive, and she seemed in really bad form. She was really stressed, and I said, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" And she said, "Stephen, all week I've been sitting in on interviews with hiring managers in sales and technical support, and in half of those interviews, if they detect any hesitancy on the other side, in spite of me drilling it into them that, you know, we stick to the offer we've made at first, they blurt out that we can move a bit further or we can move on the offer." Very often, people are eager to hire you when they're making this offer, and your silence will be taken as a tacit rejection without you, of course, having to say anything about rejection. If you do feel you want to push back, in particular, if you feel neither you nor they are quite ready to make an improved offer, or if, for example, they indicate to you that, well, there may not be much room to move, it can be a good idea to suggest that it's not quite what you were expecting. Remember what your plan is, remember what your targets are, and remember the research you did, good reasons for those targets. If you feel they are ready to negotiate, of course, don't hesitate to say what it is that you want. It's not just necessarily going to be about the pay itself. There can be other ways by bringing in other issues to help to meet both sides' interests. When I worked in that company, when I had been interviewed and offered the job, I found that there wasn't a lot of room to move on the salary, but I found that there was a stock option plan and they had a great deal of flexibility about just how much and just how soon they could reward me through that stock option plan. So there are often other ways to meet both sides' interests, including also contingent plans, an agreement that perhaps if things work out at, say, a 6-month period, the salary might go up to X, or that there might be some certain bonus if you perform to a certain agreed standard. Very important that when you are negotiating, you preserve the relationship. You're going to be spending more time with these people, unfortunately, perhaps for a while, than with your loved ones. This doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your interests, okay? This is a mistake that people sometimes make in salary negotiations, that they're afraid to negotiate because they feel it will damage the relationship. All you need to do is be polite, keep the rapport going, smile, be nice, be a good listener, but also assert your own interests. And have a clear understanding of when it's time to draw things to a close. When are you close enough to your targets that you're happy? But also, if you're not, start to figure out, well, is it time to walk away? Now, decisions like this, whether you're happy or you're unhappy, are best made away from the negotiation table. In any case, very often this kind of negotiation takes place over a few episodes, perhaps by email, perhaps by phone or video calls. Okay, so use the time in between rather than during these negotiation episodes to make decisions. We all like to think that we may be good decision makers on the fly in the heat of the moment, but actually you're more likely to make much clearer and better decisions if you pause for thought and perhaps even consult with someone else. What about within your existing role? How can you negotiate? Well, for starters, if you're looking for a promotion or a salary raise, build your case systematically. Think about achievements that you have, that you've reached. Think about the strong points of your performance. Okay. Also, try and think about how do people get a raise or a promotion in your job, and if you don't know, find out. Okay, informally or formally. You may be able to use the grapevine, the water cooler conversations. You may be able to ask trusted colleagues. You may have a mentor, okay? Or it may be a formal conversation that you can have over time with your manager. But side by side with building your case, you do need to understand what processes your employer, your organization typically uses. And prepare for this negotiation just as you would for a new job offer, okay? So go through those steps of setting your target, figuring out what your priorities are, and thinking about, very importantly, what is your fallback position? Even if you love the job you're in, that doesn't mean that you cannot have a BATNA, that there may not be some point at which you would be prepared to leave or to move on. If, for example, you found yourself in 10 years' time in the same role or on the same pay, that might not be for you, okay? So understanding your BATNA can be important. Even if you're very happy, it helps to strengthen your hand because it gives you some confidence about what your value is, and it can help to validate that. Then, and this is really important, and I'm going to bring this point back up when I talk about gender differences. Do not wait to be offered the raise, the promotion. Ask for it. Be clear about what it is that you want. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should be doing this as soon as you're in the door or every year or every 6 months. But negotiators who wait until they're offered don't do as well as those who initiate negotiations. Okay, so ask for what you want. Now, I would also say respect and understand the system. Okay, so for example, let's suppose your organization has a financial year end of the 30th of June and they talk to people about pay rises, let's say in August or September after that. I would suggest that prior to being talked to about, prior to having that conversation about pay rises, you go to your manager, whoever the appropriate person is, and you tell them what it is you want, but don't force the conversation to happen now. So respect the system and say, look, I understand we won't be having this conversation until August, September, but I want to flag what it is that I want, and here's why I feel I deserve this. In this situation, your rehearsal can really pay off. Your figuring out the other side can really pay off, because when you're in a job, you know them really well. You know your manager's style. You know what kind of objections might be raised. So it's a great idea to role play with someone else through those kind of questions. Give your counterpart in this role play a list of the questions or objections that you think your boss is going to raise, and keep going round and round until you feel very confident and clear and consistent in how you will deal with those objections. And going through that process can also help you to conquer your fear of this kind of negotiation, because there is a particular kind of fear that attaches to job offer and salary negotiations. Fear that psychologists refer to as fear of social backlash. The fear that if I do ask for more money or promotion, I'm going to suffer some kind of social punishment, like I'm going to damage the relationship. And this is something that becomes particularly important when we talk about gender differences in negotiation. Okay, so a lot of research shows that there absolutely are gender differences between the ways in which women and men negotiate. And when it comes to salary and job offer negotiations in particular, these negotiation differences are important, because unfortunately the research shows that on average, and by the way, I want to put in an important point of understanding here now. This kind of research, it doesn't apply to or describe every single woman. And by the way, some of the descriptions I'm going to give will apply to many of the men attending today. I'm quite sure that many of the men attending this session will hear some of the things I say and say, but I do that, or I feel like that in these situations. And some of the women might say, that's not me at all, that's nonsense. But on average, the research has found that women don't negotiate for themselves particularly well when it comes to salaries, promotions, economic gains, and benefits. This doesn't mean that women are not good negotiators. In fact, women can be excellent negotiators, but it seems that women are better negotiators when they're negotiating for others on behalf of, let's say, their employer, or indeed on behalf of their children or their families or their friends. So women do negotiate differently too, and unfortunately less than men for salaries and opportunities. Two of the leading authors of a text in this work, Linda Babcock and Sarah Lashiver, they called their book "Women Don't Ask," because consistently, again and again in their studies, that's what they were finding, and they were finding that women do ask. When women do ask, they were asking for less. And I want to cite now another author in this field, Dr. Victoria Medvec of Northwestern University and the co-founder of that university's Center for Executive Women. And she says that research has shown that there are 4 key reasons that act as barriers for women asking for what they want. They don't feel a given situation is negotiable. They think they will be given things when they deserve them. Remember what I said about asking and not waiting to be asked. They don't establish aggressive goals. What I mean by that is ambitious goals. And they don't want to damage the relationship. One of the underlying problems is stereotypes that we have about how women behave and negotiate and how men behave and negotiate. And I don't mean stereotypes that only men have or that only I have. I mean stereotypes that society has and stereotypes that women also hold. But the average stereotypes, unfortunately, these average lurking negative stereotypes are that women are more about relationships and shouldn't be so much about, let's say, asking for economic gain for themselves, which explains this finding that women are less inclined to negotiate for themselves. And this is what researchers in this area call role incongruity, so that women feel and can appear to others less comfortable when negotiating in these situations. And as I say, this doesn't apply to all women, but on average. And this leads to women having a greater fear of social backlash than men, and also to women actually being on the receiving end of more social backlash than men. By the way, if you are a woman and you're listening to this and you're seething about it, the researchers have found that both men and women managers issue out social backlash, and that both men and women issue more social backlash to women employees when they ask for a pay rise. Okay, so if you're a female manager, this may be you dishing out the social backlash, because those lurking negative stereotypes are deeply, deeply ingrained. The result is that there's an impact on people's expectations and negotiation behavior. Okay, that basically the role incongruity, which leads to this greater fear of social backlash, actually sets up an expectation, and therefore this explains the vectors, the dynamics that lead women to ask less and ask for less. Good news is that there are actually a lot of proven strategies that can crack this problem. Okay, so what can you do? And as I say, many men might identify with this process as well. So while the research is suggesting strategies for women, I believe these strategies can be usefully used by many men as well. Firstly, what the researchers call, they call it stereotype regeneration, which to me sounds like actually reinforcing the stereotype, but it's not. It's actually surfacing and mentally attacking the stereotype. It's saying, well, that's not me, or I'm not going to let that be me. I won't behave in that way. Secondly, being persistent in negotiation and in negotiating, in looking for what you want. And also in particular, the researchers found that when women identified particular strengths that they felt they had when they negotiated, and what happened was actually many of the women felt they were strong at building relationships, at building rapport, at establishing a good atmosphere, that when they focused on those strengths and saw those as important to the pay negotiation, they actually outperformed men. Thirdly, and this goes right back to my point about preparing, when women were extremely well informed about what they should be getting and set appropriately ambitious targets, this really reduced this performance differential. Fourthly, so the research establishes that women seem to negotiate more and better when they're negotiating on behalf of others. So what you can do if you're trying to negotiate, let's say, a salary, a pay rise, is mentally associate that with actually doing it for somebody else, doing it on behalf of somebody else. It could be that you feel you're doing it on behalf of your family, for example. Or if you don't have a family, you could feel that you're doing it on behalf of your own self-respect, personifying that as outside yourself. In other words, don't feel that this is a selfish thing to do, because it's not. And then initiate the negotiation. This is critical as well. Again, not waiting. The researchers found that persistently, men were far more likely to initiate conversations about pay or about career advancement than women. So if it's something that you're thinking about in the back of your mind, don't wait. Well, do your preparation by all means, but then do it. Don't wait to be asked. Don't wait to be offered. Okay, so I hope that you found these useful tips. And in just a moment, I'm going to move to the Q&A session. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things, and my colleagues are going to share some links a little bit later, so that you will be able to access the links through the chat. First of all, if this provides a useful taster for you, and you feel you could really do with building your negotiation skills, I run a 3-day intensive negotiation training course through Smurfit Executive Development at UCD Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School. Here are some details. Take a snapshot, write down. I'm going to move on in just a moment, but absolutely do feel free. This is actually the course that Jenny mentioned that she was on a while back. And it's an immersive learning experience. It's a small group. I've run it online. It works really well. Additionally, at Smurfit Executive Development, we run a range of other development programs. We have an MSc in business, which is a pathway. You can take individual diplomas, or if you take 3 diplomas over a period, it converts into an MSc in business. Okay, so that's enough of me plugging my wares. I'm very keen now to get into Q&A. So please, let's fire away.
Thanks so much for that, Stephen. So our colleague Michelle Cohen, who's running the Q&A, she just had to drop off there real quick. I think there's some internet trouble, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in with some of the questions that I've seen come in here through the chat. So thank you so much to everyone who has submitted our questions so far. My name is Camille, and I'm with the UCD Alumni Relations team. So we're seeing a lot of questions from people who want to know how can you maybe scope out a company's pay policies before an interview to help you prepare for the negotiation? Do you have any tips around that?
Ooh, okay, yeah. I think there are quite a few ways you can do it. I would have to say, I wouldn't see that as like an absolute core expertise of mine, but it's a question I've been asked a lot. And so I've thought of quite a few ways to do it. One of the things to do now is we're better connected than ever to people we don't really know through the likes of LinkedIn and social networking in general. So if you're not connected that way to someone in the company, it's almost certain that someone you know is connected to someone in the company. So can you find out connections that way? Look for an introduction and go ask. Can you find research on, there are websites, for example, one of them I know is called Glassdoor, which sometimes has information that employees in companies themselves have posted about pay levels. Now, some of my students in the past have said that those things aren't always reliable. So what I would say in general is, you are usually going to be at a bit of an information disadvantage. That the employer, it's a good question because the employer will usually know more about what they pay than you. And especially these days, as economic circumstances change so much, even information you do get about a company's pay policies could go quickly out of date, right? So this is one of the reasons to know what you should be getting in terms of generalized targets, like what you've gleaned from salary surveys, but wait to see what they offer you. Wait for them to make an offer.
Very good. Thanks for that, Stephen. Okay, I actually think Michelle is joining us here. Hi, Michelle. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there.
No problem at all. We've just started chatting about the Q&A. I'll hand it back over to you if that's all right, now that you're back. But what we were just chatting about there was the questions around if a company hasn't stated its pay policies, how do you kind of scope that out a little bit before negotiating? But if you're okay to take over from here, I'll hand it back over to you. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Very good.
So we had some questions just from some graduates. So just around there isn't sometimes much information about the graduate salary. So that was one person's question. So how do they go about finding out a little bit more? And then another one was that it tends to be quite a no-no because it's quite a crowded market, like there's lots of graduate opportunities available. So is it a thing that's done to negotiate at graduate level?
Okay, what I would say is, I guess we're talking here about, say, graduate programs or graduate salaries when people have graduated straight from their undergraduate or maybe postgraduate degree. Okay.
That's right, yeah.
So in those situations, what I would say is the salary itself is usually fixed because if a company is going to hire, let's say, a lot of people at the same time into the same kind of role, look, in that case, it's not a good policy for the company to pay different people different amounts and to negotiate special circumstances for one or two of those people. I would say that's also something where certainly, UCD alumni connections that you can make might be able to share information with you about what you could expect. And I am aware, certainly from working in the Smurfit Business School, that actually employers can and do differ substantially about what they pay in these graduate programs. But I have occasionally come across situations, in fact, there was one just last year, in which one of my master's students had good reason to really try and look for more in a graduate position. And there were 3 or 4 other people from her specialized masters going into that position, and there was nobody else going in. So she went to the company, she made a reasonable case, and said she understood that it would be unfair if she was paid more than the others, and that made her feel a bit uncomfortable. The company thought about it, and they decided to up everyone's pay.
Okay, oh wow, that's very, very good. So we have another question just around somebody who has accepted an offer, okay, but they found out then that actually there was room for negotiation, and now they're not sure, like, can they, like, I suppose, go back around and start the negotiation again? Can you reopen it?
Okay.
Accepted an offer.
Look, what I would say about that is it depends on your thought process, your decision process. Are you going to be saying, oh, now I found I could get more. I don't know if I'm going to take this job unless you pay me more. I don't recommend putting things as ultimatums. So I would suggest being frank and relatively open and say, look, I feel like, I've made a mistake here because I know I agreed to this offer. I know I gave you my verbal agreement. And what's happened now is I've discovered that I actually, others, say, for example, taking this role have actually been paid more. And I feel actually quite uncomfortable about that also. And that's outweighing my discomfort about asking. So I'm asking you, don't you feel it would be fair if I were paid that too? So I would say all is not lost, but depending on the extent to which it's been done and dusted and agreed, it could prove harder to renegotiate. But the best approach to take is one that is open and honest, and that you feel will look good to the employer. That's not just centered around you looking like you're trying to grab a bit more.
Okay, very good. we have a question. It's from an international student who's just interested in what kind of, I suppose, platforms would you recommend for doing salary research, or would you recommend any particular sites?
I don't have a particular one that I would
Okay.
recommend. I don't actually do it enough myself to know, to be quite honest. I know some of my students mentioned Glassdoor, and some say it's good, and some say, not so much.
Okay.
But typically locally, there will be salary surveys, often produced, for example, by recruitment consultants and headhunters. And that can be a helpful starting point.
Very good. One person is asking, I suppose, they're afraid a little bit around in the negotiation, if it felt that they were being too demanding, would a company like either cut off the negotiations or rescind an offer?
Could you run that by me again there, Michelle?
So, yeah, I suppose this person is afraid that they may come across like too demanding, and that what if the company in the salary negotiation, and what if the company, I suppose, just decided, oh no, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to leave this negotiation.
Okay, well, I would say that's a prime case for research. I don't know that person, but perhaps they have a feeling that perhaps they've got good reason for having that feeling. Perhaps others have told them, wow, you know, you can be quite abrasive. You can be very direct in negotiations. I've sometimes been told that myself, okay? So what I would suggest doing in that situation is doing your, what did I say, research, doing your rehearsal is what I meant. So rehearsing with someone else and asking, I want you to be honest with me. Am I being abrasive? Can you suggest, or can I think of ways to put this across in a way that is assertive, but it also comes across that I understand the employer's interests as well, and that I can see both sides.
Sure, yeah, that's a good tip for that. So this is an interesting one, because a person is looking at negotiating their salary when they're in the company, like they've been working there maybe a few years. And so they said they feel that they're at a disadvantage asking for a salary rise at the company they already work for. Like they feel it's easier coming in as a new hire joining rather than being in the company trying to negotiate. The person maybe knows them already.
I feel generally, you know, you're in a better position to negotiate when you are in a company to a certain extent, because, you know, some companies, like for example UCD, where you and I work, they're very fixed salary scales and points and so on. But as a general rule, you know the situation more, you can learn more about the systems for promotion, for example, or pay rises, and you know the people, so you're in a better position to predict. But the word of warning I would give, when people are in companies, sometimes what can happen is that becomes more and more and more of your world, and people forget about the wider world out there, where there are other great roles and opportunities. And if nothing else, find out about what they are. Even if you don't want them, find out, because that helps you understand that fallback position, that BATNA, and it helps you to feel more confident and powerful in the negotiation at hand.
Okay, perfect. So can you accept an offer that you're not so happy with, but with a promise that you'll get a rise or a better offer after a kind of a probationary period or assessment? Does that seem risky, or?
I say simply, yeah, it's a great way to put it. It is risky. And it may not always feel comfortable or appropriate to get that in writing. Okay, I'm not saying that's what you should do to eliminate the risk. But you could, for example, increase the likelihood that you will be given that, reduce the chances. You could say, well, that's good because this is quite a low starting salary for me. That would be important to me. So I'm confident that in 6 months' time, you'll be feeling you've made a good choice. And I'll be very much looking forward to that pay rise, because that would be quite important to me. That's pretty critical for me. So that if it becomes a problem 6 months down the line, you feel strong about going back and saying, hey, that's not fair. That's not what we agreed. Okay.
Good. This is like a rapid fire question round, Stephen. The questions are coming.
We can't keep up with them. Yeah.
Thick and fast. But someone very helpfully has shared that Morgan McKinley, so the recruitment agency, they publish an annual salary guide. So that might be useful for some people who are looking at that. Somebody is just as a question there. Any tips, right? They just do not feel assertive. They don't feel that they tend to avoid the conflict situations and that whole negotiation piece. I know you've shared lots of advice on this. Is there any other tips that you would share about someone who just really avoids this, doesn't feel assertive?
I mean, at a risk of kind of coming back to some of the points I've shared, one thing I would say is rehearsing the conversation can really help, especially getting over how you will start it. Occasionally, people I've helped with, people I know who I've helped with situations like this, all they need is to figure out, how do I get going and get comfortable into the conversation? So actually even scripting how you want to start. And then, as I said, maybe rehearsing that in front of a mirror until it sounds good, it sounds natural, and sounds good in terms of confident but friendly. A second thing that you can do is to think about, well, what skills do you bring? What strengths do you bring? Like, are you good on the people side of things? And emphasizing that. Very often people who don't feel very assertive, they're very good at listening and at initiating conversations. It can also help in these situations, of course, if you back this up by thinking about that strategy I mentioned when I was talking about dealing with the gender-related problems that researchers have identified, figuring out, well, are you suffering here from kind of fear of social backlash, of rocking the boat, for example? Could you see this as something you're now actually doing on behalf of someone else? Because we all likely do negotiate occasionally for, say, our employer, in which we have to be more assertive. So reframing this and putting ourselves in the shoes of someone else and imagining, what if I were negotiating for them? If this is for my family, really, not for me, how do I want to go about it? And finally, I'd say having a plan, actually having prepared a strategy and researched your fallback position, that can really help to build your confidence. Okay, so I would say a combination of those things will go a long way to helping with that.
Brilliant. Okay, very good. This is actually an interesting one, just around public service roles, where they often indicate a salary scale, as we mentioned, and that you have to start at the often it'll stipulate you must start at the point 1 or at the start. Is it worth applying anyway and trying to negotiate that, or do you just walk away and assume like it's really rigid and there's no negotiation?
I don't know enough about the general practice to say, oh yeah, you should do that, okay? And I don't want the civil service recruitment bodies getting onto me and saying, what are you telling people? But I can tell you that I've come across people now these would be people who have moved into senior roles, let's say from the private sector, from having a senior role in the private sector to a senior role in the public sector, and have had exceptions made in terms of where on the scale do they slot in.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's helpful for that person. So I think there's 1 or 2 people who've mentioned in chat that they've joined a little bit late. So just one person is asking, just generally, like, why do women not ask for more in salary negotiations? And I know you've mentioned the research. Just it's around confidence, in your opinion.
So again, it's I would stress it's not all women, but what the research shows is a little bit more complex than confidence, because these researchers, like Dr. Victoria Medbeck, she stresses that actually, women can be very, very firm, assertive negotiators when they are negotiating on behalf of their employer, for example, or with their school, say on behalf of their kids. But when they're negotiating for themselves, a particular dynamic is triggered, which is this feeling of role incongruity, that this is not quite fitting with who I am. And that's not the same as a lack of confidence, or this is not quite fitting of what's normally expected of me. The behavior is normally expected of me. Yeah, maybe I'm expected to be protective of my kids or work hard for my employer, but not looking for something for myself. And you've got to knock that on the head, right? That leads to something called fear of social backlash. And that's what holds women back from asking for more, okay? And as I suggested during the presentation, there are some good strategies that then can be used to overcome that challenge.
Perfect. So I think, yeah, there'll probably be a lot of people watching back your recording, Stephen. And I suppose just one final question, and maybe this is topical at the moment, where the companies have maybe promised pay increases, but they've had to be kind of postponed now. And if someone was kind of frustrated at this, I guess there's not a lot you can do right now, but would you have any tips just for dealing with that if someone's really frustrated at the minute?
Yes, I would. For starters, I have also heard of some employers who have already restored employees' pay that was cut last year. And some employers are very bad at doing this. I can think of one in particular that I'm aware of that had, like many companies, had pay cuts in the last recession we had there around 10 years ago and never restored people's pay after that. And I can think of one really prime offender where the company was absolutely minting it, okay? So the key here is if you feel you're being treated unfairly, it's a big wide world out there and you have options, okay? Don't be afraid to use those options. But it's not about just walk away. Do the research and prepare for the negotiation, and then go to the negotiating table and ask for what you want. I don't generally recommend using, let's say, another job offer or the prospect of another job offer as a direct threat, as giving an ultimatum. That can be overly aggressive. That can potentially damage the relationship. Although, again, some people do find in their companies that that's actually the process. I know of some HR departments actually saying, well, if you can show us an alternative job offer, we'd be prepared to match it, okay? But as a general rule, I don't recommend that approach. But what you can do is subtly signal that alternatives are available. You can say, well, I'm seeing both anecdotally and from what headhunters say, because as you and I know, we get calls from headhunters from time to time. If I wanted to move job, obviously, I'd have gone long ago. But I'm here talking to you today because I want my pay restored to a fair level, and I'm hearing that's what's happening in other companies. Okay, so signaling that alternatives are available.
Brilliant. I hope that person found that answer really useful. That's probably quite topical at the moment. Maybe we've time for one final question before I hand back to Camille. Just in your opinion, is there a minimum time that you should spend in a job? There's an old adage about having three jobs in a decade. Would you have any sense of having a kind of a minimum time span in a role before moving on?
No, not at all. I don't feel that way about roles at all. I think this goes beyond negotiation. I think the most important thing is that if you find the job that's right for you and that you can succeed and grow in what you can do, something that's really aligned with who you are. And I talk about this in some of the other programs that we deliver in Smurfit Executive Development, that you may be able to grow with that role for a very, very long time. And you may be able to make the role grow with you, to talk to your employer about your ideas. And many successful executives do that. So I would certainly like to think that you don't have to just do the job, 3 years you get fed up, or you feel that's the only way I can get a pay rise. Okay, because it's definitely not.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. I think you have those questions coming at you very, very well, I have to say. But certainly lots and lots of interest in the topic that you discussed today. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Camille.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. Really great steer on the questions there. And thanks again, Stephen, for your presentation. think you guys touched on advice across someone's whole career journey. So I think there's lots of things we can take away from this session. Just before we wrap up, I have a couple of odds and ends that hopefully people will find helpful. I've seen a lot of questions, for example, on whether this is being recorded. So hopefully we can give you guys the resources you need before we head away. So first of all, I just want to say thanks for all your questions. And if you want any more time to speak with Stephen and to get some more of your questions answered, he is doing a mentoring circle as part of the Women in Leadership Conference on the 25th and 24th. So if you'd like some more time with him, please feel free to sign up, and we'll be posting a link in the chat in just a couple of minutes. You can also connect with Stephen on LinkedIn after the session. So the link to his profile is being posted now in the chat. As well, if you're looking for slides from today's presentation, we have that and numerous other resources on the What It Takes resource hub in the UCD Alumni Network. So you can find that at the link in the chat as well, just here. And also, like I was saying, this is being recorded. So if you want to watch back this episode anytime, you can find it on the UCD Alumni Relations YouTube channel. We'll have that and the slides up probably tomorrow for you to access. And now just looking ahead, if you enjoyed this session and you want to think about other events we may have coming up, as my colleague Jenny mentioned at the start of the session, this is part of UCD Women in Leadership 2021 programming. The next Women in Leadership Masterclass is on personal branding, be very similar to this session, and it'll be happening on February 17th. So check out the link in the chat to register for that. But please be sure to also check out the full Women in Leadership virtual conference lineup for more talks like this, as well as the mentoring circles that I mentioned. As well, just on a different note, you can also tune in to a very special episode of UCD in Conversation tomorrow. It's called Hear from the Experts, UCD and the COVID-19 Vaccine. So it's a really timely and important topic. It features 3 experts connected to UCD who are leading the fight against the coronavirus: Dr. Killian DeGaskin, Professor Teresa Lam, and Professor Karina Butler. So you can register for that at the link in the chat as well. And finally, this series aims to support our UCD community with career development opportunities, but we'd also like to mention our commitment to supporting our students through the COVID crisis. So generous funds have been raised thanks to alumni and friends of UCD like you. And if you'd like to support our efforts to provide urgent financial and mental health support for those students who need it most, you can visit the link in the chat here as well. So with that in mind, that's all from us tonight. Just want to say again, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hope to see you again next time. Take care.